I'm Paul, and we're going to go over how to do a planar breakdown of the head. So this is defining sort of the flatter areas of the head when we're trying to draw it. So we're going to use the same method we used last time when we did the basic generic head proportions. So I'm going to start with just drawing drawing a circle. So we'll draw a circle for the cranium, and then after we draw the circle, we're going to do the same sort of method where we define the center of the circle. All right, so here's the circle, here's the center, and then a little bit below that we're going to draw, sort of just a little bit, and then from there we're going to double this length here from here to here, and that's our chin, right? So what we're trying to do in this exercise is, we're going to identify the same sort of proportions, but we're going to identify sort of the flatter areas and use that as a guide to sort of when we start wanting to draw different areas of shading and things like that. We'll define the planar breakdown, so we have a geometric breakdown of the head. Now, a lot of times, even if we're not drawing shading or anything like that, it just helps in the three-dimensional drawing aspect of it. So, when we're looking at things like this, we talked about doing, sort of the halfway point here for lips. We have the nose point here. So all of those have sort of a planar breakdown. So I'm just going to draw like the sphere first for the nose, and then the nostrils, and then the part of the nose that goes here. We talked about doing the eyebrow ridge here, and all of those. Then you could start defining where the planes are, where these kind of flat planes are that we're going to emphasize. Now, obviously, the head is really curved. It's not really flat, but we can identify this if we're trying to identify it as geometry rather than as sort of spherical shapes. That this sort of forehead area is more flatter. It is curved, obviously, but it's flatter than the rest. So we kind of go in here and we're going to start kind of identifying what is flat, especially around the eyes here. We have this sort of mask area that I like to define that has that is going inside the skull, so flatter here. And then I like to look at this as, if you look at it as like a mask, then you can kind of identify where the eyes are. So with animating and things like that, if you're tracking the eyes, you can track that shape a little bit easier when you're moving it around. And then, you obviously have your eye sockets in there. And so the light, when you're lighting this, or even when you're just three-dimensional drawing it without lighting, you're tracking these shapes that have some three-dimensionality. And so by doing it as, when you're trying to define this as flat planes, planar tracking is one of those things that is easier to do when you're trying to track flat shapes and things like that. It's a little easier to define where those areas are. So you'll see I'm kind of just looking at the shapes here and trying to figure out which parts are flatter, and where they go back in space. So this goes back in space here. This sort of three-dimensional, if you look at it as three-dimensional things that are turned, or flat things that are turned in 3D space, you can kind of get an idea of why you want to do that for projecting these different proportions. So last time, remember, we did the projection of the proportions of the ears, the eyes, and kind of deciding how far the ear goes down, right? So it kind of goes down right, between the nose and the mouth. And so you get to kind of think of those ears too as another plane, right? Another flatter area. And then you'll further break these things down into other flatter areas, like the nose ridge might have several flat areas in it, and same thing with the sides of the nose. So, when you go in here and you start looking at all these different shapes here, just do an analysis, like trying to figure out, hey, which parts are going to be flat. If the light is striking down this way, then where are my shaded areas, or where is this going to be darker versus lighter? That's kind of the point of drawing this three-dimensionally and doing this planar breakdown. Now with animation and things like that, we're not always concerned about lighting. We might be concerned about, the outlines of things, but still, even with the outlines, we want to understand, where the three dimensionality of the shape is, or solid drawing, as we call it in animation. So when we're doing these different shapes here, we can kind of start putting these together. And this is looking more like an android than a real person, but that's okay. We're just kind of using this as, this is kind of really being used to define the shapes, not necessarily really looking at a finalized drawing. This is sort of your underdrawing, if you will. And then you can kind of look at, if you were looking at it's a shading model, you can say, okay, this is where the light strikes here, the light strikes here, shadows are cast on this side. And so then, you can kind of finish this drawing up based on that. And I like to kind of, use this as a basis for drawing shapes when I'm doing different views of them. So when I'm doing this is more like a study, than a final drawing. But, you can look at even the hair shapes as different plane shapes too when you're drawing that. So this is sort of like a review exercise of what we did last time when we did all of the different shapes as just sort of spherical shapes, but now we're defining them more in 3D. So